Press one finger into the top of a raised bed after watering, and it may feel cool, dark, and damp. The strange part is that 3 inches lower, the roots may still be living in drought. A bed can look watered on top while it is drying out from the bottom. By the end, you will know how to test that hidden dry zone and change the way water actually reaches the roots. That is the part that fools even careful gardeners. You water in the morning. The surface darkens. The bed looks settled. Maybe there is even a little shine between the soil particles. You walk away thinking the job is done. Then by mid-afternoon, the leaves soften, the stems lean, and the plant looks like it somehow missed the watering entirely. Most people look back at the top of the bed and think, but it is still damp. And it may be. But plants do not drink from the top skin of the soil. They drink from the zone where their roots are actually growing. If that zone is dry, disconnected, compacted, or sitting beneath a layer that water does not pass through evenly, the plant is still thirsty. The surface can look wet while the root zone is still thirsty. Once you understand that sentence, a lot of strange raised bed problems start to make sense. A raised bed problems start to make sense. A raised bed is not just a box full of dirt. It is a vertical system. Water enters from above, moves through the surface, crosses different textures, fills small spaces, drains through larger spaces, and eventually reaches the roots. If any part of that path slows, hardens, sheds water, or holds water too high, the plant feels the problem before the gardener sees it. This is where most gardeners get misled. They judge the whole bed by the top half-inch. That top half-inch changes fast. It darkens quickly. It cools quickly. It can feel damp from a light watering, a little dew, recent mulch, or even moisture that never moved much deeper. But the lower root zone changes more slowly. If it has been dry for days, one quick pass with a hose may only wet the surface and leave the deeper area almost untouched. That sounds like a water problem, but it usually starts lower. The first cause is shallow watering. A quick sprinkle can make a raised bed look refreshed without delivering much water to the working root zone. The top becomes dark, the dust disappears, and the gardener feels reassured. But underneath, the dry layer remains dry. Over time, roots learn where the moisture is. Instead of growing down into a steady reservoir, they stay shallow, crowded near the surface, and more vulnerable to heat. Then the bed becomes even more confusing. Because shallow roots dry faster, the plant wilts sooner. The gardener waters again, often in the same shallow way. The top gets wet again. The deeper zone stays dry again. The plant survives, but it never builds the stronger root system it needs. This is how a raised bed can be watered often and still behave thirsty. The second cause is texture. Raised beds are often filled in stages. A little native soil, a few bags of raised bed mix, some compost, maybe old potting mix, maybe leaves, maybe a cheaper filler in the lower half. None of those materials are automatically bad. The problem begins when they sit in layers that behave differently. A fine, fluffy mix on top may absorb water one way. A denser layer below may accept it more slowly. A dry compost-heavy layer may resist wetting at first. A compacted lower zone may stop roots and slow water movement. When water reaches that transition, it may pause, spread sideways, or run through channels instead of evenly soaking the root zone. From above, the bed looks watered. From below, the root sees gaps. This is especially common in beds that were filled quickly. The top looks beautiful because that is the part the gardener handled, amended, and smoothed. The bottom may be older soil, packed material, or a dry layer that never fully joined the rest of the bed. The plant does not care that the top 2 inches look rich. It cares whether water and roots can move through the whole profile. A raised bed can be full and still be disconnected. The third cause is compaction. Compaction in a raised bed does not always look like a hard clay path. Sometimes it is just a lower layer that has settled too tightly. It may come from stepping into the bed, using heavy wet soil, letting the bed sit uncovered through hard rain, or filling it with material that collapsed over time. When soil spaces are squeezed shut, water does not move through the bed the same way. It may sit above the dense area, run along the side, or slip down cracks without soaking the space where roots are trying to grow. Roots meet that dense zone and turn sideways. The plant becomes shallow-rooted even though the bed is deep. That is the hidden drought. Not a desert on the surface. A dry or poorly connected zone where the roots should have been. And yes, sometimes the answer really is more water. A hot raised bed in July can dry fast, especially if it is narrow, exposed to wind, or filled with a very light mix. But if you are watering often, the surface feels damp, and the plant still wilts during the day, more surface watering may only repeat the same mistake with more confidence. The question is not, did I water? The better question is, where did the water go? There is a simple way to find out. Do not test only with your fingertip. A fingertip tells you the story of the surface. Use a small trowel, a soil probe, a wooden dowel, or even an old screwdriver if the soil is loose enough. Check 4 to 8 inches down, near the plant but not so close that you cut the main roots. For young seedlings, the important zone may be shallower. For established vegetables, the working zone is often deeper. Push the tool in after watering. Wait a few minutes. Then open a small slice of soil. If the top inch is dark and the soil below is pale, crumbly, and dry, you found the problem. If the tool comes out muddy near the surface but dusty lower down, you are watering the top, not the root zone. If the tool hits a hard shelf, a dense layer, or a sudden change in texture, water and roots may be stopping there. This one test can save a season of guessing. There is another simple test. Water one area slowly, then come back 10 or 15 minutes later, and dig a narrow inspection hole at the edge of the wet spot. Do not flood the whole bed. Just look at how far the moisture actually traveled. Many gardeners are surprised to find that a watering that looked generous only moved down an inch or two. That is not a failure. It is information. Once you see the dry layer, the fix becomes more specific. The fix is not to keep polishing the surface. It is to water the root zone. Start by watering more slowly. A raised bed that has dried unevenly often cannot absorb a hard blast from a hose. Fast water hits the top, seals fine particles, runs toward the edges, or escapes through cracks. Slow water gives the soil time to accept it. Instead of one quick soaking, use cycles. Water until the surface begins to glisten. Stop for a few minutes, then water again. That pause lets moisture move down instead of racing away. For a dry bed, 2 or 3 slow passes are often better than one dramatic flood. The goal is not to drown the bed. The goal is steady moisture through the root zone. After watering, test again. If the soil is damp 4 to 6 inches down around the plant, the water reached a useful depth. If only the top is damp, repeat more slowly. If the bed stays wet on top but dry underneath, you may be dealing with a texture break or compaction layer, not just a watering schedule. This is where structure matters. Water moves best through soil that has connected pore spaces. That means a mix that can hold moisture but still breathe. Finished compost can help because it improves the way soil holds water and supports better aggregation over time. But compost works best when it is part of the root zone, not just sprinkled like a decoration on top of a dry bed. If the bed is empty before planting, loosen the upper 6 to 8 inches with a fork. You do not need to turn the whole bed upside down. Just open the profile. Mix finished compost into the upper root zone, especially where the old surface meets the lower layer. Break up obvious hard shelves. Then water slowly before planting and check whether the moisture connects from top to lower zone. If the bed is already planted, be gentler. Do not rip through roots trying to fix everything at once. Work around the plants. Open small vertical channels between plants with a narrow trowel or garden fork. Add finished compost on top and lightly scratch it into the upper inch where you can do so safely. Then water slowly enough that the compost layer becomes part of the moisture pathway instead of forming a separate wet blanket above dry soil. Mulch helps, but only after the bed has moisture worth protecting. That part matters. Mulch on top of a dry root zone can make the bed look cared for while the roots remain thirsty. It shades the surface, slows evaporation, and keeps the top from crusting, but it does not magically refill a dry lower layer. Water first. Confirm moisture below. Then mulch with a modest layer of straw, shredded leaves, fine wood chips, or dried grass clippings that have not been treated with herbicide. Keep mulch slightly away from tender stems. Do not pile it like a collar around the plant. The mulch is not the water. It is the lid that helps the bed keep the water longer. There are also fixes that sound logical, but often disappoint. Adding gravel, rocks, or chunks of wood at the bottom of a raised bed is often sold as drainage help. In many backyard beds, it can create a sharper boundary between materials instead of a smoother water path. Water does not always move neatly from fine soil into coarse material the way people imagine. It can pause above the change, move unevenly, or leave roots dealing with a disconnected profile. The same goes for dumping rich compost only on the surface and expecting roots to chase it down. Compost is useful, but if the lower zone is compacted or dry, the plant still has to cross that barrier. The bed does not need a prettier top. It needs a better connection. This is where most gardeners get the wrong lesson from wilting. They think, my plant needs rescue. Sometimes it does, but often the bed needs correction. A plant wilting at 3 p.m. after a hot day may be normal temporary stress, especially for large leaf crops. But a plant that wilts early, recovers only after frequent watering, and never seems to root deeply is telling you something about the bed. If the surface is damp and the lower soil is dry, the symptom is not laziness. It is location. The water is in the wrong place. Look for 3 signs. First, the plant wilts even though the top of the bed feels damp. That points to a dry root zone or shallow roots. Second, water runs off or pools briefly before soaking in. That points to crusting, compaction, or a surface that is accepting water too slowly. Third, plants grow well for a short time after planting, then stall as soon as their roots need to move deeper. That points to a lower layer that is dry, dense, or different enough to stop easy root movement. Each sign asks for a test, not a guess. Open the soil. Check the depth of moisture. Feel the transition between layers. Look for pale dry soil beneath dark wet soil. Look for roots growing sideways instead of down. You do not need a lab for this. You need one careful look below the part that was trying to convince you everything was fine. The strange part is that once you start testing this way, you may water less frantically. Not always less water, but less panic. A bed with a connected root zone does not swing as wildly between wet-looking and thirsty. It still needs irrigation. It still responds to weather. But the moisture is held where roots can use it. The plant is not forced to live in the top inch like a guest with no key to the rest of the house. That changes how you use compost, too. Compost is not just food. In this situation, it is part of the moisture system. It helps the bed hold water more steadily when it is blended into the working zone and protected with mulch. But it cannot fix a hard shelf by sitting politely on top of it. It has to become part of the pathway roots and water share. The same is true of watering. You are not watering the color of the surface. You are watering the depth where the plant lives. That is the turn. When you stop asking whether the bed looks wet and start asking whether the root zone is connected, the whole problem becomes clearer. The wilted leaf is no longer a mystery. The damp surface is no longer proof. The dry lower layer is no longer invisible. Go back to that first raised bed, the one where your finger pressed into cool, dark soil and everything seemed fine. Now that damp surface means something different. It is not a promise that the plant has enough water. It is only the first page of the story. The real answer is lower,